afford rent, getting gentrified. Marx in the house, about to tell you why. What up, y'all? Welcome to Marx in the House, a show where we discuss gentrification from a Marxist perspective. Last week, we talked about the switch from liberalism to neoliberalism in really broad terms. Today, we're gonna see how this process played out in two countries, Chile and Mexico. The violent struggle behind neoliberalism is nowhere near as blatant as in Pinochet's Chile, which is interesting because it was actually the first neoliberal experiment. It all started with a coup in 1973 against the democratically elected government of Salvador Allende, who was a democratic socialist. Remember, 1973 is also the year all those petrodollars flooded New York banks. Now listen, I have enough crits against Allende, but 1, he was a gazillion times better than Pinochet. 2, there was a real people's movement and push for socialism from the people of Chile, which is what really matters. Alright, so to start things off, the coup surprisingly had nothing to do with US interests, and I'm totally fucking with you. It was pretty much the CIA backed by US corporations in support of the domestic bourgeoisie. It's weird that every time we try to implement socialism through elections, a coup always happens right after. Makes you wonder. After the successful coup and murdering and torturing tons of socialists, the Pinochet government got help from a group of economists known as the Chicago Boys, who were all about that sweet neoliberal economic theory. Their first job was to negotiate loans with the IMF. They abolished taxes on underdeveloped land and lowered taxes on land transactions. They also privatized previous state-owned land. Most importantly, they delivered property land titles to more than 100,000 households in Santiago. Now this is a gentrifying tactic that we see pop up a lot in the global south. A lot of cities have what are called informal settlements. The state generally leaves these alone, not granting them legal or illegal status. But whenever the land values these settlements are on increases, all of a sudden they're made official. Cause then the government can say, hey, you're on this land illegally, even though previously they never even gave a fuck. And then displacement occurs. The Pinochet government dismantled the existing state-built social housing apparatus and set up a laissez-faire land market with open access to private financiers, realtors, and developers. The global bourgeoisie, dying to switch circuits with industrial capital having fewer opportunities for investment, saw this as a golden opportunity. Fresh, juicy property markets? No financial regulations? Boom. There was just one thing in the way of sweet dumb profits. Fucking people. The Chilean government found a great way to displace people and absorb all this capital. The state, in combination with the private market, built suburbs to send the people to. The people in the inner cities all of a sudden found themselves in quote-unquote illegal settlements, campamentos. But in actuality, these were huge displays of people's power. The people of Santiago had built their own barrios, houses, schools, and health clinics. The displacement that followed was insane. Between 1980 and 2000, 202,000 social housing units were constructed in Santiago in order to move 1 million people, 1/5 of the capital's population, from self-constructed areas to segregated housing complexes far from the city center. Most people fucking hated it. Overcrowding in small houses and isolation was a big blow to the people's culture created in the campamentos. Informal networks of help and support were disbanded, and participation in community organizations decreased strongly. People who were displaced lost their jobs, faced an increase in transportation costs, and continued to have major problems in accessing education, healthcare, and other social benefits. Despite the real estate investments in Chile, neoliberalism had totally fucked up their economy by 1982. You see, Chile was a guinea pig that Britain and the US studied and learned from. Now, something else stands out upon a second look. Gentrification in Santiago, for example, followed the same pattern of investment, disinvestment, and reinvestment. But that initial investment in the campamentos was by the people, not by bourgeois capital. And the more we explore gentrification in the global south, the more variations on a theme we'll see. But for now, let's switch to Mexico. Whereas Chile was the first neoliberal experiment, Mexico had the good fortune of being the first national bankruptcy that happened because of neoliberal reforms. Remember how the stagflation crisis of the 1970s caused many countries in the imperialist core to privatize former public industries? In Mexico, the opposite happened. In an attempt to keep the working class and unemployment in check, the number of state enterprises more than doubled between 1970 and 80. But these enterprises were losing money, and the state had to borrow to fund them. Remember the New York petrodollars? Yeah, now you understand why this shit was so important, huh? Around this time, Mexico's new oil discoveries made it an attractive bet for finance capital. May the lending begin. New York banks started pumping their petrodollars in Mexico like it was nobody's fucking business. Mexico's foreign debt rose from $6.8 billion in 72 to $58 billion in 82. The government found itself unable to pay back all this debt because of a high interest rate policy. On top of that, a recession in the US diminished demand for Mexican products. On top of that, oil prices went diggity down, which caused Mexico's debt to go diggity up. Mexico declared bankruptcy in August of 82, which is also the year the message came out. Hey, this shit is fucking depressing, man. I gotta try to fucking spice it up in some way. I'm tired, dude. Now what happens when a country declares bankruptcy? Da-da-da-da-da, capital flight. Here I want to take a look at the difference between bankruptcy under liberal and neoliberal practice. See, if this were still the age of embedded liberalism, lenders would have just taken their L and moved on. But under neoliberalism, lenders force the borrowers to go to any fucking lengths to repay back their loans. And when the borrower is a whole ass fucking government, then you're talking about a pretty big deal. The IMF, World Bank, and US Treasury, aka the Satanic Trinity, got together to force Mexico into budgetary austerity and broad neoliberal reforms. We've gone over this package many times, but let's just go over it one more time. It meant privatization, opening up barriers around finance capital in ways more consistent with foreign interests. And of course, the fan-fucking favorite, opening internal markets to foreign capital and lowering tariff barriers. In 1984, 11 years after the first neoliberal experiment, the World Bank, for the first time in history, granted a loan to a country in return for structural neoliberal reforms. And of course, everything went to fucking shit from there. The Mexican government tried to repay the debts by privatizing fucking everything. Indigenous people in Mexico lost their right to hold and use land collectively under the ejido system. In 1991, a law was passed that permitted and encouraged privatization of the ejido lands, opening them up to foreign ownership. And if this wasn't enough, which of course it wasn't, the US also drove down the price of corn, which forced many peasants off the land, proletarianized them, and sent them into overcrowded cities. Many there were close to starvation. These were also the conditions in which the Zapatista rebellion broke out in 1994. Remember, financial crises mean that the rich only get richer. So while the country's starving, Mexico ranks 9th in the world for its number of billionaires. Now of course, with both privatization and foreign capital circulating all loosey fucking goosey, you'd expect a rent gap and thus gentrification. Sad to tell you that your expectations are reality. We talked a bunch about how capital circulates globally, right? As well as how the international bourgeoisie works together across borders because they operate out of the same class interest, which is to keep capital circulating and expanding. Yep. Let me give you a concrete example of this class alliance. Mexico City wanted to implement some gentrifying policies, but there were all these pesky people in the way. The local government knew that New York had already successfully dealt with its excess population in the way of sweet gentrification. So in 2003, ex-New York Mayor Giuliani was paid a whopping $4.3 million to consult the local government on creating a citywide, quote-unquote, crime program. Damn, 4.3 mil. I wouldn't even know what to do with all that fucking money, man. Well, actually I would, but I can't say that out loud for legal reasons. Anyway, why did Mexico rely on Giuliani so much? See, Giuliani was actually a mayor right when the last remnants of public housing started to be decimated. A federal program, ironically called Hope 6, was instituted under Bill Clinton. This program pretty much rewarded local housing authorities to demolish public housing and replace them with suburban-style cribs. These units would of course be built by private developers. This was a huge project. Between 1990 and 2008, 220,000 units of public housing were demolished and replaced with only 60,000 mixed-income housing. Mixed income sounds nice, but most locals couldn't afford that shit anyway. It was during this time that New York had a zero-tolerance policy and was cleaning up the streets. This just meant throwing black and brown people in jail for minor offenses. The mayor in Mexico City in 2003 wanted to do exactly the same thing to the historic center in Mexico City. But there's layers to this shit. You see, the whole meeting with Giuliani was mostly paid for by multi-billionaire Carlos Slim, who got rich off of all the neoliberal reforms that we literally just fucking talked about. The plan was simple. It's no coincidence that they started with the historic center, cause old historical buildings means tourism, means high land value, means rent gap, means money. And where else are the rich gonna live if not there, goddammit? They started off the process in 3 steps. 1. They replaced the water and sewage infrastructure and built a commercial corridor. A sweet, juicy land value anchor. 2nd, they built a bunch of hotels, a visitor center, and a skyscraper. 3rd, they removed and relocated the 30,000 ambulantes that worked in the center. Modern gentrification is a worldwide collaborative project prompted by the global bourgeoisie. They learn from each other, exchange policies, and help fund a sanitized capitalist dystopia. And by God, do I fear the fucking day we run out of food items to make milk out of and to decorate pizzas with. Cause who knows what aesthetic gentrification will take on then. This is what neoliberalism looks like. The brutal displacement of working class people. Not that this didn't happen under liberal capitalism. After all, liberalism lynched black people and perpetuated native genocide. But neoliberalism upped the fucking scale. Next week, we're gonna take a look at how private companies run cities now. If you enjoy Marx in the House, please consider donating to my Patreon and or sharing this video with friends and comrades. It's my goal to make a lot more video series analyzing art, history, and politics through a Marxist lens. If you enjoyed this video, you'll enjoy the other ones that magically popped up on the screen. And look up Space Baby on Spotify to check out my music. Peace, love, solidarity, Space Baby out.